I was just going to say, I started a bit early there, but you Australians, you've made a terrible mistake. You've given a Kiwi farmer a microphone in front of a captive Australian audience. And one thing I love to do more than anything is talk about my own country, New Zealand, and also farming. So hopefully today, over the next 20 minutes, this is going to be quite entertaining. It's a little bit of a story about me and how I became an electric cherry farmer, right? What is an electric cherry farmer, you might ask? Well, that requires just a little bit of backstory. I was originally a city boy. I grew up in Wellington, New Zealand, and after university, where I got a computer science degree, I moved over here to the lucky country, predominantly Sydney, where I spent 12 years building technology startups, one of actually which is fortunately quite successful and was acquired in 2019, which gave my wife Rebecca and I a chance to move back to New Zealand. Not that we did not love Australia, but simply we're at a point in our lives with 2 young children where home was calling, where family was calling. And we wanted to move to an area of New Zealand that was specifically really important to us. That was Queenstown or Wanaka. For those that you have been, you'll understand it's the mountain biking, it's the skiing, it's the kayaking, it's the outdoors. It's all of the things, right? But what we actually found was the perfect home with 9 hectares of spare land for the same price as a 4-bedroom house in Queenstown, right? Now, I'm an entrepreneur who was looking for a new way to reinvent myself, something new. For anyone who's sold their business before, it's kind of like you divorce your identity at that point. You're a whole new person. You don't really know what it is that you want to do. So I was looking for a new opportunity, and I saw this land as this opportunity. Now, my wife, she's a senior accountant, and well, she simply loves a bargain. And so between my wife and I, we decided very, very quickly that what we were going to do next was enter the primary sector of New Zealand. We founded a cherry orchard in central Otago called Forest Lodge. Forest Lodge is 9 hectares of cherry trees. And I planted cherry trees because I became quite conscious about the climate and thought that planting cherry trees was a good solution. I planted 9,300 of them, 25 kilometers worth of cherry trees, right? At full production, which actually we got this year, is about 80 tons of cherries coming out of our orchard. That's 8 million cherries leaving our gate. But I got the people in to have a look at the numbers, right? I really wanted to see how much it was that my trees, my 9,300 trees, were sequestering in carbon. And the problem is, it actually wasn't much at all. It worked out to be about 3.8 tons of carbon. 9,300 trees, 3.8 tons of carbon, which was a real problem because the elephant on the orchard was that we would need to emit about 32 tons worth of emissions running the machines required to run a productive cherry orchard, right? This was a major problem for me. So over the next 5 years, because we were starting with a blank canvas, what I started to do was look at, was there an electric option available for all the machines that I needed in order to run a productive cherry orchard? And well, in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about 21 electric machines that are required to run a productive cherry orchard, and how across my farm and my home, because I live on the farm, we save about 50 tons of emissions, and more importantly, we save about 40,000 New Zealand dollars on energy every year, right? To put that in perspective, the payback on everything that we have spent is now under 13 years, and we save 32 tons of carbon on the orchard. Now, the next few slides have a lot of numbers on them and a lot of detail. I don't want you to focus on the detail. I just want you to know just how much detail we go into here. Every dollar and every cent that we have spent, that we have made and we have saved is in this report, right? So if you're a numbers person and you want to get stuck into the numbers, this is the report. But I'm going to run through some of the favorite machines on my farm and what they mean. So the first thing is, for those of you that know about horticulture, in particular stone fruit, we are very susceptible to frost, particularly in spring, right? What we do in New Zealand and what we do in a lot of places in Australia as well is we install what are known as frost fighting fans or wind machines. They simply pull the warm air down from above, mix it around the orchard to bring the average temperature of the orchard up. If it gets too cold, our fruit tissue begins to die. If our fruit tissue dies, we have no crop and the bank comes calling, right? Now, up until this point, the only frost-fighting machine option available were diesel machines. And depending on the model, they would burn anywhere between 30 and 40 litres of diesel an hour, right? Now, we are talking New Zealand pesos here and not Australian dollars, so there's a little bit of a discount that we can take here. But overall, we're looking at hundreds of dollars an hour to fight frosts, compared to what I bought, which are these electric frost-fighting fans, sight unseen from South Africa, that I managed to import with the help of Eka, which is Australia or New Zealand's version of Arena, right? These are 30 kilowatt frost-fighting fans that cost about $9 an hour to run, and with the help of a grant, I actually managed to get my payback down to 0 years. Now, in the last 3 years, we have had probably in the vicinity of 14,000 farmers come to our farm to learn about how we have electrified absolutely everything. And one of the common myths that farmers bring to my farm is the idea that electric vehicles are great for the city, but they are not great for people in the country. I have to explain to them that this could not actually be further from the truth. The more Ks you drive, the more money you will save in an electric vehicle. And to put it in perspective, in New Zealand, it's about $3 a litre for petrol. If you are to charge these cars and run these cars on New Zealand's national grid, it's the equivalent of about 60 cents a litre. And if we're able to run it off our own solar system, it's down to about 30 cents a litre. The most popular thing that I've ever bought, the final piece of the puzzle and the most complex thing to import into New Zealand, was New Zealand's first commercial electric tractor. This involved myself and my business partner flying all the way to San Francisco to convince the board of a billion-dollar tech startup with a presentation very similar to this, I might add, that actually we are their ideal customer for them to send one of their tractors. This was the 66th tractor ever made in Australia, in America, and the first to be exported out of California. One of the great things for me, one of my great milestones, was seeing the CEO lean over to his chief of staff and whisper in his ear, "I really think we need to get these guys a tractor," right? And this tractor has been an absolute revelation because it costs about $2 an hour to run compared to a diesel equivalent, which might be up at around $15 an hour. And then we had to get interesting, because when you buy an electric machine, like an electric car or indeed an electric tractor, the first thing that farmers ask you is about range. Will it go the distance? Will it last long enough? And the short answer is, for horticulture, and in particular cherries, most of the time that we use a tractor is for foliage spraying, right? We probably use foliage spraying for a couple of hundred hours in the year. The problem was a traditional foliage sprayer runs off the back of a PTO, right? A power takeoff out the back of a tractor, and it's really, really energy intensive. Using a traditional sprayer, we could spray for about maybe 4 hours, right? But it takes 10 hours for us to spray our orchard. We had to come up with a better solution, so we ended up inventing an electric foliage sprayer, which we think is the first in the world, right? It is one that runs off a 32 amp caravan plug out the back of the tractor rather than off the PTO. And when we push all these numbers together, you start to see, again, this is bleeding edge technology, market payback about 15 years, but with the help of innovation grants that were available from the New Zealand government at the time, we had again got this down to $0. So in that report, I added it all together. Exactly how much money I've spent, exactly how much money I save, all of the grants, the market payback, the carbon saved, and all of that kind of thing. And this is when it got really exciting, right? Because all of a sudden, as a farmer, I could start using energy that I could generate myself. 21 electric machines, all those electrons can be made right here on farm. I'm no longer buying Saudi Arabian molecules, I'm using my own electrons. And this is where the numbers really started to stack up for me. If I was on a diesel farm, or if I ran a diesel farm, about $50,000 a year in energy costs. Again, New Zealand dollars, slightly less for Australia, but you get the idea, right? By electrifying everything and running off New Zealand's national grid, I more than halve my energy costs, right? That little solar installation on the shed there, well, that nearly halved my energy costs again. But the interesting thing I now find myself in is I've decided that I'm going to go even bigger. Something that I firmly believe the farmers are going to play a key role both here in New Zealand and Australia and probably globally, is that farmers are going to become the future power plants of the world. I think this year I am going to create about $40,000 worth of profit from energy generation and storage on my farm, right? So that's not only saving $50,000 on diesel, that's creating a further $40,000 revenue stream. And how do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. New Zealand did not follow Australia as we should have with your solar revolution. So the price of power on the wholesale market in the middle of the day is about 17 cents a kilowatt hour. which means right now I can generate and get a return of about 4% a month on my solar system that I have installed on farm. The other really exciting thing is my local DNSP is now paying me as a farmer to power 25 homes during their peak congestion periods, something we have to unlock for farmers in Australia as well. So let's talk about the economics of the energy system super quickly. Now, I'm using New Zealand numbers, but Australian numbers are actually fairly similar, right? If you look over there on your right-hand side, that is the cost to generate a unit of electricity at New Zealand's large power plants. And what is really important to understand is you as consumers, us as farmers, us as house owners, that is not what we pay for electricity. We must also pay for all the poles and wires that connect our homes and our farms to those power stations, right? And when you add it all up, the typical New Zealander is now paying 34 cents a kilowatt hour. The typical Australian is paying something like 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, if you look at that yellow box, that's where it gets really interesting. If you look at the total capital cost to install a solar system on my farm and divide it by its expected production over its lifetime, even when I finance it on my mortgage at 5.5%, it works out at about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. A remarkable savings opportunity. Another way of looking at this is even if Peter Dutton was that generous, he came all the way over to New Zealand and gave us a free nuclear power plant in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand and said, free power for all the New Zealanders because we love you, it still wouldn't get to my farm cheaper than my own solar system, right? Very, very important. Now, the next thing is we have to talk about New Zealand's emissions, right? New Zealand's emissions are categorized with traditional sector categories. And what it immediately shows you is it makes our farmers look like climate criminals. You know, you guys are going through the same thing over here, but in New Zealand, because of our economy and the way it's shaped, we really do look like climate criminals to a lot of people. And one of the things I'm adamant that I want to do is change the way that we talk about emissions in New Zealand. Remap them, not add to the emissions, not subtract from the emissions, but just change how we talk about them, right? Our export emissions and our domestic emissions. Our export emissions is how our country makes all its money, and our domestic emissions, which are essentially the emissions created to underpin the average lifestyle of a New Zealander. And very, very similar to Australia, New Zealand, if we take those emissions and we isolate those emissions, about 25% of New Zealand's gross emissions come from 10 million small fossil fuel machines where the technology exists to replace them today, and in many cases the economics already stacks up to do so. It's pretty remarkable. Now, one thing New Zealanders have always done is we've always talked about how renewable our electricity system is, right? Really renewable electricity system, so much more renewable than the Aussies, but we've always neglected to talk about our overall energy system, which is still largely fossil fuels. Those 10 million machines cost us a lot of money. They cost us about $40 million a day, which might not sound like a lot of money to Australians, I'm not sure, but we have one of the worst current accounts in the OECD. It's not the only way to solve this problem, but a clear way that we can solve this problem is to stop buying Saudi Arabian molecules and start running off homegrown electricity. And finally, we have the resources to do it. In order to electrify everything in New Zealand, we're going to need 2 to 3 times more electricity, right? But we have a hydro scheme that does largely what your coal power plants do, provides amazing base power. We have amazing wind resources. We have amazing sun resources. Not quite good as you guys up here in Queensland, but probably similar to the state of Victoria. We have 2 million homes where it is now an economic slam dunk to put solar on the roof, and by doing so, we'll generate another 40% electricity for New Zealand's electricity system right there. But our real superpower is our farmers, right? If we do what I've done on the 50,000 farms in New Zealand, we will generate about another 60% renewable energy for New Zealand's electricity system. So the farms and the households alone can double the amount of electricity on New Zealand's electricity system, which is super exciting. So I'm going to finish off here by talking very, very quickly about why New Zealand is so awesome, in the spirit of the Anzacs, right? Something to take away. Did you know that New Zealand had the first fully electric home in the world? Defined as fully electric because it didn't have a chimney, right? We heated our water and we heated our home with this particular home with resistive electric heating. Why? Because fossil fuels were so goddamn expensive and New Zealand hydroelectricity was really cheap. It's the same reason we built the first electric street lights in the Southern Hemisphere, And it's the same reason we had the second ever transmission line in the world. Now, if you're an energy nerd like me, fly to Queenstown, go check this out. It is absolutely amazing. But the relics of this are still available today. It was a 3-kilometer transmission line, right? Now, we also have the world's first fully electric cherry orchard. And the challenge I want to lay down to Australian farmers now is we have a number of world firsts on the way in New Zealand. We will have sometime in the next 18 months the world's first fully electric milk, right? We will have fully electric Sauvignon Blanc, and we will have fully electric kiwi fruit. We will have electric bacon, and we will have electric fried chicken, right? But the main thing in all of this that I want to stress is that New Zealand and Australian farmers are cut from the same jib. I've had so many Australian farmers come to my farm in the last couple of years, mainly to learn about what we're doing. Yes, we've got slightly different energy systems. Yes, we have slightly different farming systems, but both of us underpin our economies, right? And the things that we can do to work together, most importantly, I think that as farmers in Australia and New Zealand, we can work together to electrify everything. Thank you very much for your time.